Is Monarch mind control done on a computer? Today, I want to get into some of the interesting language from the book, The Illuminati Formula, used to create an undetectable total mind-controlled slave by Cisco Wheeler and Fritz Springmeier. And before we get into it, I just want to say this video is for fun and entertainment purposes only. It is meant to inspire discussions, but always use your discernment. So that being said, I also want to talk a little bit about the history of the authors before we really get into the meat of some of the content in this book. So let's give you a little background. Just doing a very basic internet search, we have Fritz Springmeier, who really can't find that much information online about. When I Google his name, I really had to dig for some stuff. But I did find basic Wikipedia info that said that his father worked with international development or something like that, I think in Pakistan maybe. And I think he went to the University of Kansas, has a degree in English literature, something like that. So just very basic stuff. Nothing really memorable. Okay, we'll put it that way. And then we have Cisco Wheeler, who co-authored, I believe, several books with him. And I think she even has her own book called Behold the White Horse. I think it was Behold the White Horse or Beware the White Horse. I think it was Behold the White Horse though. But she is an alleged Monarch programming survivor. And I could not find any information on her except on a foreign website. I don't know if it was English. I don't think it was Spanish. It looked like Spanish, but I don't think it was. So I had to translate her biography. And by doing so, I found out that her father and her grandfather were 33-degree Masons, and she claims to have been raised in a satanic cult, and said that her grandparents they were part of the Ulysses S. Grant bloodline, and also were involved in the Vietnam War, moving DRUGS and contributing to the war on DRUGS. So when she met Fritz Springmeier, she was able to escape the control. So Fritz Springmeier, in his, I guess, epilogue or the introduction of the book, talks about how the information in the book is from survivors and ex-programmers. And I think he named some huge number, like, I don't know if it was 40,000 or like hundreds of thousands of people who are affected by this. And I'm sorry again for not being a better fact checker, but this is walk and talk. This is what you get because I'm too fatigued to edit this video and share screenshots. But I do have other videos where I've shared actual screenshots from this book. So if you're more of a fact person and you want to check out the screenshots, you can find that in my Monarch Programming Why We Don't Remember. I think it's the video about fragmented memories. And then I also have a video on Monarch Programming and handlers. Do you have a handler? So I will link those in my description for more fact-based videos. But today we're drawing from memory. And I haven't really gotten much into the end part of that book, or like the later parts of the book, because most of the information I've been sharing has come from the very first handfuls of chapters. So in my channel, we've gotten into everything from early programming and how the psyche is split through birth trauma. We've talked about the bloodlines and bloodline tracking. We've talked about how they use substances in the book when implementing mind control. And then we've talked about different tactics that they mention in the book, like flashing lights and hypnotic voices, and then even Disney programming, which they mention Alice in Wonderland. They mention Beauty and the Beast, I believe. I'm trying to remember what else they mention in it. Hold on, we got a jogger. So anyways, but we haven't gotten into the parts about the computer coding. And that part is particularly hard to get through, and it can be really disorienting to read because it talks about how these are administered via codes, and it kind of compares the mind to a circuit board, to a computer, to something that can literally be programmed with codes. And I've shared glimpses of my story on here. There's obvious reasons why I haven't gone into great detail, but the gist of it is when I was in a particularly unsettling situation that mirrored a lot of the Monarch programming, I actually stumbled upon this book. I don't even know how I stumbled upon it. Probably Googled something and came across it and was like, oh my gosh, Monarch mind control. And I read all about it. And what really took me aback was not only the parallels in my early childhood and how the splitting and the dates they mention, like the 18 months when the programming starts, separation from your childhood handlers and kind of like love bombing. They talk about that, love bombing the infant. And then they also talk about how programming can only be done on children with an IQ of 130 or higher. So those are, or I don't know if it can only be done on them, but those were they said it typically did not work under an IQ of 130. And then in later videos, I found out that only about 2.5% of the population has an IQ of 130 or higher, which I thought was extremely interesting. And again, that was just a basic Google search, so I really don't know how they even got their information or if that's accurate at all. But if it is accurate, then that's pretty staggering that that's only like 2.5% of the population. And then when you think about gate children and all the parallels I've drawn on this channel between gate or gifted and talented children and monarch slaves, gate and gifted children tested in the top 95th percentile. So, well, in other words, the top, only 5% of kids tested would have tested in that top 95 percentile, right? So, very small percentage. And also, I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of gifted and talented kids ended up being ushered down specific paths in life, whether that was military or entertainment or computer coding or really smart stuff, or that a lot of them ended up also becoming neurodivergent and also having psychic gifts and abilities. And that's a whole other conversation when we look at the gate rabbit hole and all the testing done, how the government was interested in psychic testing on children, etc., etc. But in this video, let's go back to the computer codes, how I found this when I was going through that situation. And again, what really caught my attention was all the early mirroring in my own life with what they were talking about in that book. And then when I got towards the end, this is what really creeped me out. They were talking about alpha, beta, theta, delta, omega programming. And where this gets really creepy is my own personal experience with a specific organization that was using not only a lot of conspiracy talk and a lot of things that literally mirrored that book to a T, like the cube of Saturn, talking about how elites worship Saturn because it represents Satan, talking about Lucifer, practicing occult magic, knowing an awful lot about secret societies and organizations, which on one hand could mean that they're indoctrined from a specific family and that's how they know this, or it could mean that they're just a person who has researched a lot and they have no ties to any of these families or any of this stuff, this real stuff, if this stuff is going on. So this could be purely based on them wanting to be perceived as mysterious and powerful. That's why it's important not to jump to conclusions when we're noticing these parallels, because we've got so much information at our fingertips today that, like I said, anyone with the wrong motivation, too much time on their hands, and ulterior motives can be looking this stuff up and think, hey, it might be fun to start a cult. Hey, it might be fun to like see if this mind control stuff really works on people. So just because you know something about something doesn't mean that it's real or that you have real life experience with it. It just means that there are similarities that, yes, we can absolutely pay attention to, but don't base our lives around it, right? So anyways, this person was using a lot of the lingo from the book, and it freaked me out. One thing in particular was a part where I got into alpha, beta, and omega and delta codes. And this person in particular was talking about coding a lot, and it really freaked me out because omega in particular is suicide programming in the Monarch programming literature. And then delta is mentioned as the assassination coding. So I don't know if that means to train the assassin or to, I don't know if that means put out a hit on somebody. I don't know, speculation. And alpha is like your core personality. And then beta is something I'm sure a lot of us have heard. Beta is like the SEX kitten. Think someone like the Marilyn Monroe archetype, or like Erica Kirk archetype, somebody that is used by intel agencies to get intel and use them as the honeypot. So what I found interesting while I was looking into some of the history of this book and the authors was that there's a lot of parallels between the literature that was coming out at the time about SRA and these alleged mind control programs. And this was popularized in the 80s and the 90s. So according to ChatGPT, who I do not think is an expert by any means, and who I'm absolutely convinced follows a specific programming, there's specific programming that they cannot talk about. So what I found interesting is when I was trying to find some more research on this, I asked ChatGPT why they would even use the computer coding if it was just a metaphor, like ChatGPT was saying. And I think it's so interesting when you try to have a conversation, even just on Google and AI, the first thing the AI response will say, like when you're trying to do this kind of research, is this is all alleged, it's not necessarily true, this is controversial, there's no scientific evidence. So there's like so many disclaimers. And I'm gonna play devil's advocate here right now and say, is that because this information is very true, but they don't want people to know about it? Or is it because they're literally just trying to prevent misinformation and fanatic thinking about this stuff? So maybe both, I'm not really sure. But when you try to look up at this information, it's just like, there's no shred of a doubt, according to AI, that this stuff is real, right? So they make you feel kind of crazy for even looking into it. Like it's not true, don't believe it, there's no scientific evidence. And then I'm like, well, let's just keep asking questions here. Especially because my mind goes to, all right, well, there's things like nanoparticles, nanotechnology, that's literally in everything from sunscreen, food. Pretty sure it's probably sprayed into the atmosphere. I could be wrong on that. Packaging, containers, coffee even. They found nanoparticles in coffee. So my understanding of nanoparticles are that I was wondering, I'm like, well, can they pick up information? Can they pick up frequencies? Do they make humans like an antenna? I don't know. I'm trying to educate myself on this because I'm not very much a tech kind of person. And when I was asking the AI chatbot, it was like, yeah, you can't transmit information through nanoparticles. They don't allow you to. But then we see other creators like Sabrina Wallace, who raises a lot of really thought-provoking questions, talks about how she's a DARPA survivor and they did experiments on her, and she says that we've been hooked up to the cloud since the 90s. So in other words, Westworld might be more than just fiction, if that's the case. So according to a lot of Sabrina Wallace's teachings, she says we have a wireless body network. They're tracking our biometric data. Even AI, Google, and all of our social apps, not only are they scanning our faces when we're doing the unlocking of your passcode, they're listening to our conversations all the time. And every time you're in your house, even though you're watching the TV, there's a monitor on the other end that can watch us and spy on us. Same with your cell phones. Have you ever been talking to a friend on FaceTime or something, and then your hands aren't touching it, their hands aren't touching it, you're both sitting down watching each other's face, and then somebody says something and all of a sudden a like button comes up. So how is that happening? Is it like the Apple tech where you can get on the phone with somebody from Apple support and they can walk you through how to fix your cell phone if you only share your screen with them? Is it something like that? Or is it some kind of glitch in the technology? I don't know. I'm just asking questions. So all that to say, depending on the source and depending on what your gut says about the source, there really are no, or at least there seem to be no really clear-cut answers about this stuff. So the other interesting thing about the book, without having the book in front of me, and like I said, just simply going back to the history of the authors who wrote the book, Fritz Springmeier was the narrator or the part of the author team that wrote it down into a systemized way. And Cisco Wheeler was the one relaying information. So this is all coming from Cisco Wheeler's own memories of her own experience and her remembering that the mind control was done like a computer. Now, where it really gets interesting is if we're looking at some of the religious aspects that the book also talks about. Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, how it looks like a circuit board. Human design also uses Kabbalah as one of the pillars of human design as well. And the human body graph does look an awful lot like a circuit. And there are literally things in human design called your circuitry, which is what the gates and channels make up. And it looks a lot like a circuit board in a computer or some kind of tech, right? So back to the book, Wheeler mentions Kabbalah, he mentions Saturn. He says Saturn is Satan, and then the black cube of Saturn. Apparently in Kabbalah, the number 3 and 4, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 or both, that are associated with Saturn. And it might just be because Saturn typically represents structure, discipline, and 4 walls. And then you get into the conversations like, well, why is all of our architecture square? Why are we in square boxes and square houses when all of the ancient buildings were domes and circular buildings, right? I don't know. But all of that is really interesting. And then the book that Cisco Wheeler wrote, I don't know if it was after or before her involvement with Fritz Springmeier. I feel like I have a hair on my arm, sorry. But that book also goes into the history of the most ancient cults. And I think they talk about Babylonian times and Egypt. So there's all these parallels between the ancient religions and then people comparing them to computers. So now, I was not expecting the conversation to go this way, but that just brought my mind to the lost city of Atlantis and how a lot of people who consider themselves star seeds or chosen ones or indigo souls feel a connection to the lost city of Atlantis. And that is really interesting to me because Atlantis was allegedly a very highly advanced civilization, and I think I even remember reading about how there may have been some Nazi type experimentation in Atlantis. But then we have the floods of Atlantis and how it covered the cities underwater. Is there a tie to Tartaria and how Tartaria buildings and civilization was destroyed by the mud floods, and some of the buildings ended up, I don't know if they ended up in water or underground as well. So is there a connection there? What do you think? But Atlantis apparently was destroyed because humans were not using the technology ethically. So my question is, when you look back to the Mayan calendar, there's some more interesting parallels there, and how they relate to the New Age lingo and things that people are talking about with the timeline split in the year 2030, which also aligns, the Mayan calendar aligns with the creation of CERN and CERN experiments, which are also rumored to be opening portals to hell, and Project Looking Glass, which stopped in 2012. Project Looking Glass, again, an alleged project, could not find much information about other than some basic information, which I have covered in other videos, but the gist of Project Looking Glass was that they were using kids and psychics to sit inside this kind of machinery. I don't know if it was copper. I don't remember if it was like a, Khazarov mirror or Khazarov egg or something like that, where the psychic could get in the middle of this machine and then they could see different timelines play out. So I don't know if something about their DNA was unlocked, and that's why these beings or these people that were used in these experiments could get in here and actually predict the timelines. But apparently all the timeline predictions ended in 2012, which, like I said, was the creation of CERN. And what's also very interesting, seemingly unrelated, is the Mayan calendar, which ended, I think it was October of 2011. And so after the Mayan calendar ended, we were in a phase, or we are in a phase of humanity that is called a testing period, where we are co-creating with, I guess, the gods, co-creating with gods. And then that is very interesting to me, because I'm remembering my personal experience with law of attraction and learning about all that stuff. And for me, when I think back to my life, I literally have a song that I wrote in 2011 that was talking about how my life felt so fated. But after 2011, it was the first time I got a chance to travel, and I started feeling like I had more control over the direction of my life. And then when I was at a bar drinking in like 2012 or 2013, I saw a picture on a bathroom stall. It said, "The secret is real. What you think, good or bad, will happen." And it was profound enough that I took a picture of it and I made it my profile picture for a while, but I didn't read the book until I got sober in 2015, 2016. And then when I read the book and I started really looking into the law of attraction and learning about how to control my own emotional frequency, that's when I really started becoming a believer in law of attraction, because I was watching myself co-create my life and like my thoughts manifesting in the real world. And I've tried many processes like scripting. Scripting is something where you journal before bed. So you journal either from future you who already has what you want, or you can talk about yourself in third person, like Alex is successful, Alex is skinny, Alex is happy, or whatever you're trying to manifest. At the time, I was overweight, so I was absolutely trying to change my self-image and my diet, because I had struggled with emotional eating a lot in the past. And I started scripting about it, and literally, without even consciously trying to diet, just scripting these things in my mind right before I go to bed, when your mind is extremely malleable and susceptible to this kind of reprogramming, I would wake up like a couple weeks later, you kind of like put the intention out there and then forget about it. So you're not completely obsessing over it, but you're doing it enough where you're excited while you're doing it. Like, I create my own reality. It's really cool to, I'm really excited about the idea of having this. And then you kind of, at a certain point, I would forget about doing it every night, or my scripts would change every night. And then before I knew it, I'd look in the mirror one day and be like, I've lost weight, which is crazy because I wasn't even trying. So there is actual, I think, science behind that. I think there was actually a weight loss book based on hypnosis. It was called Think Thin. And it was a tape that I bought in like 2010 or 2011. And actually, when I think back before I learned how to consciously script or consciously co-create my life or manifest or whatever you want to call it, I remember buying this book and listening to the audio before bed and thinking like, this stuff is crazy. This isn't going to work. How am I going to lose weight by listening to some guy's audio telling me that food isn't good or bad? I like eating healthy food, or whatever else he says in the hypnosis. But I was so brainwashed by diet culture back then and whatever I had read in magazines that I had some deep rooted beliefs that food was good or bad, that I could not control what I ate because I didn't believe in my own ability to control what I ate or have discipline. So all of that was manifesting externally. But I remember listening to this tape, and then all of a sudden I found myself exercising more and eating healthier, like actually eating vegetables, because for a long time in my life I didn't even know like what a vegetable was. My idea of a vegetable was like a slice of iceberg lettuce on a turkey sandwich, or a tomato slice on a bacon, egg, and cheese breakfast sandwich. Like that was how young, unhappy Alex ate. And now I like prefer vegetables and fresh food. I want my food, fresh and alive and living and breathing, and I feel better and more energized eating that way. But I just think it's so interesting to be in a specific state of mind for so long and then not believe in any of this, think it's a whole bunch of bull crap, how anyone can reprogram your mind, and then just being open just enough to be open enough to try it and actually listen to it. And then, like I said, before I knew it, I had already started seeing some results from reprogramming my subconscious mind. So this kind of brings us back around to reprogramming of the mind, or the programming, I wouldn't say the reprogramming, but the programming of the mind in Monarch control, and how Wheeler and Springmeier talk about it in terms of your handler being a programmer, as in their computer programming, or a computer programmer, and then they use specific, very techie computer lingo. And like I said, during the 80s and the 90s, there was, what's it called, the satanic panic. There was, I think that would have been after the Charles Manson cults and Helter Skelter and all that stuff. So my point is, though, that there was becoming more of an interest in our culture with consciousness in general, but also the fear of satanic agendas and organizations. And then mind control stuff was coming out in the 80s or 90s. And I think that might have been the first time in pop culture where it was discussed about the Greek letter system. So the alpha, the beta, the delta, the omega. And again, going back to that book, they mention all that stuff in code, like it's some kind of code you can program. So my question has been, is this some kind of code that they mention subtly? For example, if you think of all of the Greek organizations, like fraternities and sororities, how you rush after high school. So it's kind of like you're born into the education system. You go to high school. After you go to high school, they funnel you into college. But since you don't have parental control in college, a lot of people find their community through sororities and fraternities, which are really just have a lot in common with cults because they offer community, they offer connection through the alumni organizations, community service, but they also promote alcohol and addiction. And my guess is that most people who experience RAPE when they're in college a lot of the people who experience those things very likely happened at a frat house or frat or sorority party, at least from the particular cases that I remember when I was in college. It was always usually involving some kind of big party like that, where somebody was slipped something in their drink, or they just didn't have control over their mind and they were too incapacitated to be able to make good decisions, or they were just at the wrong place in the wrong time. So all that to say that these organizations may mean well, but they're also really promoting harmful behaviors. And if you're looking at systematic institutions that essentially mind control the people who are part of those systems, as is mentioned in the book, which again we're going to take with a grain of salt, right? But it's all mentioned in the book, and my question would be then, is that just another form of mind control disguised as community and networks? Because essentially it's the same thing as other organizations like Freemasonry, for example. When you think of people wanting to join those organizations, it's usually because if it's not a bloodline thing or a family thing, I don't know if just anyone can join because I'm not a Freemason, but it's the same type of thing, like networking with other people, acts of service with the community, brotherhood, secrecy. So same thing with like Greek organizations, not to mention the hazing rituals and the negative stuff that might happen with those things, which is kind of like a form of mind control and fear and secrecy and all that, right? So we can see how this stuff is kind of normalized and woven into our culture. So as I was saying with the computer coding, I'm wondering, is it a literal code, like some kind of code word that they're sending out through some kind of nanotech or some kind of frequency modulation or something that we're picking up as humans? Or is the computer coding something more subtle, like he was using computers as a metaphor, and then it's just slipped into things that are normalized in our culture, like fraternities and sororities, for example, and then through those organizations, they can also use substances to promote things like, oh, come hang out with the sisters and the brothers, and we're, beer for everybody. We're going to go do community service, but be drunk while we're doing it. So is it a way to keep you in line, keep your mind soft and moldable, and put you in certain mind states so you're more likely to adopt the messaging in those systems? That's definitely something to think about. Another thing they mention is the beast programming. And I think they mention the number 666. If you look at angel numbers, 666 simply means the balance between the material and the physical world. Fun fact, Earth is rotating at 600 or 66.6 thousand something. I don't know, because I just saw like a glimpse of this the other day. Somebody was mentioning how Earth is a flying rock on space, whatever, spinning through the atmosphere, and it rotates at 66.6, which was shocking to me because I was like, whoa, I didn't know that, or maybe I did know it, but I forgot about it. But so that's interesting. So we have 666 beast programming, which is mentioned in kind of like a computer sense. Should I even mention Stargates and Atlantis, and then the shows about Stargates and how they literally have a show about the Stargates in Atlantis? So it's like, were they telling us something? Are they disclosing something? Are they trying to activate people into remembering that? Because if you think about TV and media programming, at the end of the day, it's like, what is all of it for? Is it to program us so certain events happen, or is it a way to lightly disclose things and get people comfortable with them? And perhaps this whole movement with the mind control, with all of it, and the secrecy and the secret organizations, blah, 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 and the media programming and Hollywood agendas, blah, 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 is all of it for kind of like part two of the Atlantis timelines. Like, is this a huge experiment in consciousness? Was Atlantis real? Did it get wiped out? Was Tartaria real? Did it get wiped out? And everything got reset. And that's why all these, high up bloodlines or whatever, who may or may not be connected to actual reptilians. I don't know. I think I've heard those theories out there. So again, come to your own conclusions with that. But are they connected to these, to extraterrestrial beings? Or are they just connected to the fallen angels? Are the fallen angels aliens and extraterrestrials? I don't know. But my question would be, is Atlantis, was that a real thing? And all this history has been buried, and it's these organizations, this top-down pyramid that, creates the narrative, hides everything, burns the libraries of Alexandria, kind of like the book Fahrenheit 451, that movie and book, how they're destroying knowledge, so only a specific amount of knowledge. We can even say that Gnosticism might fall under that. I might be mistaken with this, because I'm more of a person that knows a little bit about a lot of things, except for those things that I become obsessed with. But Gnosticism, from what I remember reading, is like was hidden, and not a lot of people know about it. Now it's just being talked about more and more. So all of this stuff that was hidden and is now coming to light, was it hidden from us for a long time because there's been a specific awakening process on the planet that we have to go through? Because perhaps the whole reason that Atlantis was destroyed was that humans could not handle the technology. And I was not expecting the video to go here, but I'm thinking of is it 12 races? It's just weird. Like, so there's 12 apostles in the Bible. There are 12 zodiac signs. There are 12 Greek gods. There are, I might be wrong on this, but I swear I heard something about the Anunnaki creating humans as kind of this slave race, and it has different DNA from 12 different beings. 12 times 12, is that 144? Is there some kind of math here? Like, I don't know. But sorry, my mind is just, I'm a little drained today, okay? I took a day off yesterday and I was like, I can't take another day off. I must show up for my people. So thanks for being here. But my brain is a little tired and I feel like I need a rest soon, or like a really long nap. But anyways, all that to say, the Anunnaki and the 12 alien races that supposedly seeded humanity, when there was experiments where Atlantis was a thing, and then the Nazi technology and like all this technology was in dangerous hands, in the hands of beings who could not use it responsibly. So then did they wipe out humanity and they reset us, and now we're in another experimental phase, and it depends on the percentage of us that wake up to this information, that understand what's happening, maybe that are even leading, so to speak, this consciousness movement. And ultimately, the goal is to raise consciousness responsibly. And perhaps with the bigger goal of being, we are experimenting with unlocking the higher strands of DNA. So that's reminds me of another video that I mentioned in one of my videos the other day about the alchemists talking about the chosen ones, and simply the term chosen one meaning the anointed ones, or the ones whose pineal glands were online. So I'm thinking like indigo children. I'm thinking that like when your third eye is open, you can see, but you're also not seeing things in a distorted way. And I think a lot of times when we have trauma stuck in our systems, we do perceive things with our third eye in a distorted way, not to mention all of the mind control through religious programming and cult programming, and the organizations that run the country, like all sorts of different programming can absolutely keep people stuck in lower states of consciousness. So it all goes back to, for me, I really am starting to think, especially after this walk, that maybe it does have to do with Atlantis and the timelines and the Mayan calendar preparing us for this split. And apparently the apocalypse timeline. If we go through with that, then it creates the grays. And there was, I remember reading how the Roswell crash, oh, that's right, when I was doing my Did Gate Kids Open a Portal video, or it might have been the Are You the 1% video, but we were going back all the way to the Roswell crash, and they found like Sumerian tech at the site, and it was able to predict timelines and stuff. But basically, I think that might have even been connected with like MJ12 and S4 and some secret government projects like Project Aquarius, where they had the extraterrestrials that they were interviewing, the ones that survived from the crash, and they were learning from them according to certain whistleblowers. But those beings telling us essentially there's beings on your planet that want that timeline to happen, because if it doesn't happen, they won't exist. It will wipe out their whole civilization if we collapse that timeline. But I'm wondering, is there another possibility and potentiality for Earth? And that's why they're talking about the timeline split. So are half of us going to go to that timeline where we give the apocalypse so much mental attention that it ends up creating that event and magnetizing that event and giving it emotional energy? It's harvesting our energy so that it happens, and that these entities, these civilizations all survive. And then the other timeline split is those of us who don't want the Earth to get destroyed, that aren't consciously choosing that. We're choosing the evolved timeline, the higher timeline. Maybe we've been living in both this whole time, and that's why things like the pandemic, you saw people who experienced absolute hell on earth, and then you saw people experience fatter paychecks and time off work and time to learn a new hobby and getting a lot of money from the unemployment checks and not seeing anyone that passed away or anything bad happened. So it's like you had the same people sharing the same earth, except they had vastly different experiences, which was part of what was creating a lot of the separation on the planet, especially a lot of the separation in politics. And now you have people who are so split and so far down their own, dogma. You've got sections of people who are very much into this idea that the end times are going to happen. There's an event and the rapture is going to happen. They're going to fly away in the sky while everybody gets stuck here on Earth or whatever, or lost in some kind of cataclysmic events. And then there's a lot of people, a lot of teachers who are envisioning a more positive timeline for humanity where none of that stuff has to happen. If more and more people wake up and realize we get to choose. And that's why manifestation and law of attraction, I think, is something that I feel so drawn to, and something that I am glad that I learned about, because I've been able to put a lot of law of attraction type stuff into practice and really get a handle on my own emotional frequency and literally understand the relationship between my own feelings and what manifests in my life as a result of the beliefs and the feelings I have. And that's the period that we've just been through in astrology over the last couple months, with Scorpio season and with Sagittarian season, which is right now. When I think that's why I'm talking about cults and belief systems a lot, because I'm inspired by the Jupiterian energy, which is all about belief systems and philosophy. And it's important that people understand how we get swept away into certain ideologies and belief systems. And a lot of it has to do with cult-like grooming tactics, and they're not always done consciously. Sometimes it's more unconscious how this stuff is happening, but it's important to understand our power as individuals and learning how to maintain our sovereignty even in the group. And I think that gifted people and people, I don't know if all gifted kids were part of Monarch programming, but according to the book that we've just been discussing, it sounds like intelligence did play a big role in it. And what I've learned and what I've witnessed and what I've seen is that most of the people that I know who I'm close to in my life, I've found out that they were all in the gifted program, and literally every single one of them has this wolf-like mentality where they're a leader in their own right. They can be part of the group and part of the pack, but they're very individual, and they're very much starting things in their community that is helping people either assist in the awakening of consciousness or doing stuff on the planet, like helping with our food systems, like fighting corruption in the creative industry. So, you know, women don't have to be afraid to be alone with male producers who may try something inappropriate with them. So like entertainment industry stuff, like calling out the abuse in the systems, helping people wake up to their own patterns and programming, all which is assisting in the elevation of consciousness on the planet. So I just find it all really interesting how all of these things keep connecting, and it just leads me back to believe what I think is ultimately true, is that there's a little bit of truth in every religion, in every belief system. So we, as the individual, get to pick what resonates for you. And what I always ask myself is, what is most empowering for me to believe? Because even if something is true, and knowing that the world is going to end, like let's just say that was a truth and we all knew it was going to end. So let me ask you this, let me ask myself this, like even if that's the case, would you rather be right or would you rather be healthy? Would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? In other words, just because something's going to happen, is that the most empowering and the happiest way I can live my life? Or do I want to enjoy the time I have on this planet? I'm not saying put the rug over your eyes and don't do anything about it, but I am saying there can be other more empowering ways to frame it so that we are able to make use of our time on the planet and have an enjoyable time while we're here, and look at life as a gift and a blessing, like all the beautiful things that we can experience while we're here, whether that be nature, whether that be our relationship with animals, with food, with family, with, you know, the hobbies that we enjoy, like riding on a motorcycle or swimming or surfing or whatever it is. So there's so many beautiful things to enjoy here in this lifetime. And I think it's very easy to get swept away in this conspiracy culture and spend too much of our mental energy trying to uncover some kind of truth because it makes us feel more in control. But at the end of the day, we're kind of missing the point, because even if that stuff is the case, we can still make a positive difference while we're here, and we can make a positive difference in our own lives by enjoying the time that we have here and not falling victim to this conspiracy talk, but framing it from a more empowering way. And that's, again, like I said, maybe that's why there are so many different belief systems, because there's some kind of truth in every one of them. But we get to, as the individual, decide how we want to frame something. So I feel like that's a good place to end the video. And if you need any help exploring your own belief systems, I do have tools in my description of every video: fear inventory and belief system worksheets. I have an ESP development and remote viewing mastery course, and I also do one-on-one astrology and human design readings. If you want to learn more about your energy field or your personal path, it can just help make things easier for us while we are here on this planet. So if you're interested in working with me, you can find all that information in my description. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.